November 11th, 2000. A Saturday morning in the Austrian Alps. The Kitzsteinhorn mountain, elevation 3,203 meters, towers above the picturesque ski resort town of Kaprun. It's early in the ski season, and the slopes are filled with excited skiers and snowboarders eager to hit the glacier runs at the summit. The temperature is cold but perfect for skiing. Fresh snow has fallen overnight, coating the mountain in pristine white powder. But before we dive into this story, please write in the comments where you're watching this video from and what time it is right now, and to help us reach 1,000 subscribers, please hit that subscribe button. We research and present stories forgotten by time, bringing you every detail. If you're ready, let's begin. At 9 a.m., 161 passengers, tourists from Germany, Austria, Japan, the United States, and half a dozen other countries, board the Gletscherbahn Kaprun 2 funicular train at the Lower Valley station. They're carrying skis, snowboards, poles, and the anticipation of a perfect day on the slopes. Among them are families with children, experienced skiers, and casual tourists. Some are regular visitors who've ridden this train dozens of times. Others are first-timers, marveling at the engineering that allows a train to climb 30 degrees up the inside of a mountain. The funicular is a marvel of 1970s engineering. Built in 1974 and modernized in 1993, it runs on a single track stretching 3,900 meters, 12,800 feet, from the valley station to the Alpine center at the summit. 3,300 meters of that distance, over 10,000 feet, is inside a tunnel carved through solid rock. The train itself consists of 4 passenger compartments, with a conductor's cabin at each end. The conductor switches positions as the train travels up and down, controlling operations from whichever end is leading. What makes this system unique is how it operates. There's no engine on the train itself, no fuel, no combustion, nothing that should be able to start a fire. Instead, the train is pulled by steel cables connected to a massive motorized winch at the summit. 2 trains run simultaneously on the same track, one ascending while the other descends, passing each other at a midpoint loop. It's an elegant, simple system that's been used safely across Austria for decades. The Gletscherbahn Kaprun 2 has been carrying passengers for 26 years without a major incident. For the 161 people boarding that morning, this is just another routine trip to the slopes. At 9:02 a.m., the train sets off. The passengers settle into their seats, chatting excitedly about their skiing plans for the day. Some are checking their equipment. Others are looking out the windows at the mountain landscape as the train begins its ascent. The conductor at the rear of the train, the descending end now becoming the ascending end, monitors the journey from his small cabin. Everything is routine. Everything is normal. The train moves at 25 kilometers per hour, 16 miles per hour, up the steep 30-degree slope. Within moments, it enters the tunnel, and daylight disappears. The tunnel is unlit, except for the train's own lights. The walls are bare rock and concrete, gray and featureless. For most passengers, this is unremarkable. They've been through this tunnel before, or if they're first-timers, they've been told it's part of the experience. Just a few minutes of darkness, and then they'll arrive at the Alpine center and the slopes beyond. But 8 minutes into the journey, at 9:10 a.m., the train unexpectedly stops. They're 600 meters into the tunnel, roughly 2,000 feet from the lower station, and 1,132 meters, 3,714 feet, from the Alpine center at the top. The passengers look around, confused. This isn't a scheduled stop. There's no station here. They're in the middle of the tunnel, surrounded by darkness and solid rock. Some passengers assume it's a mechanical issue. Maybe the winch system paused. Maybe there's another train ahead that needs to pass. They wait, expecting the train to start moving again at any moment. But minutes pass, and nothing happens. The train remains motionless in the pitch-black tunnel. An uneasy feeling begins to spread through the compartments. And then someone smells smoke. It's faint at first. Just a hint of something burning. But within seconds, it becomes unmistakable. Smoke is seeping into the passenger compartments from somewhere in the train. Passengers begin looking around nervously. Where's it coming from? What's burning? The conductor in his cabin at the front of the train, the ascending end, has no idea what's happening at the rear. The train isn't equipped with intercoms or internal communication systems. There's no way for passengers in the rear compartments to alert him that something is wrong. The smoke intensifies. It's not just a smell anymore. Passengers can see it now, thick and grey, filling the compartments. People start coughing. Children begin crying. Panic sets in. Passengers begin banging on the walls and windows, trying to get the conductor's attention, trying to signal that there's an emergency. But the conductor, isolated in his cabin at the opposite end of the train, can't hear them. The thick walls and the sealed compartments make communication impossible. Finally, several minutes after the train stopped, the conductor becomes aware that something is wrong. Smoke has reached his cabin, or perhaps someone managed to alert him through the small windows between compartments. He immediately attempts to contact the control center using the train's communication system. At 9:14 a.m., he reports a fire and tries to open the hydraulic doors to evacuate the passengers. The doors don't open. He tries again, nothing. The hydraulic system that operates the doors has failed. And then, making everything infinitely worse, the conductor loses all contact with the control center. The fire has burned through a 16,000-volt power cable running alongside the tunnel track, causing a complete power blackout throughout the entire ski resort. The lights in the Alpen Center at the summit go dark. The winch system stops, and most critically, all communication between the train and the outside world is severed. The 161 passengers and one conductor are now trapped in a burning train, in the middle of a tunnel, with no power, no communication, and no way to open the doors. Inside the rear compartments where the smoke is thickest, passengers are beginning to lose consciousness. The air is becoming toxic. Carbon monoxide from the fire is filling the enclosed space, displacing oxygen and poisoning everyone who breathes it. Those still conscious are desperately trying to find a way out. They pull at the doors, but the hydraulically operated doors are designed to be secure. They cannot be forced open manually when the system is engaged. Then someone notices the windows. They're made of shatter-resistant acrylic, designed to withstand impact and prevent breakage during normal operations. But desperate situations require desperate measures. One passenger, a builder named Erwin Goetz, begins striking one of the windows with his ski pole. He hits it again and again, as hard as he can. The window is tough, it's designed not to break. But Goetz keeps hitting it, driven by the knowledge that if he doesn't break through, everyone in that compartment is going to die. Finally, after what feels like an eternity, a crack appears. Goetz keeps striking. The crack spreads, and then the outer layer of acrylic finally shatters. But his relief lasts only a second because behind the broken outer layer is another layer of acrylic glass. The windows are double-paned for insulation. He has to break through both layers. The smoke is getting thicker. More people are collapsing. Goetz keeps hitting the second layer. Every second counts. Every breath is harder than the last. And finally, mercifully, the second layer breaks. Fresh air rushes in through the opening, or at least air that's less toxic than what's inside the compartment. Passengers begin pushing toward the broken window, desperate to escape. Meanwhile, the fire that started this nightmare is growing. Later investigation would determine that the fire began in a fan heater installed in the conductor's rear cabin during the train's 1993 modernization. This wasn't a heavy-duty industrial heater designed for use in moving vehicles. It was a Fakir Hobby TLB, a domestic space heater meant for home use. The heater's manual explicitly stated it was not to be used in vehicles. But during the modernization, someone had installed it anyway. A design fault in the heater caused it to overheat. The heating element's mounting bracket broke, and the element jammed against its plastic casing and ignited. But that was just the beginning. The heater was positioned directly beneath a 160-liter hydraulic fluid reservoir, 42 gallons of highly flammable liquid under pressure. The hydraulic system was used to operate the train's doors and brakes. As the heater burned, the heat caused a slow leak in the hydraulic lines. Flammable hydraulic fluid began dripping onto the burning heater, feeding the flames. The fire grew hotter and began melting the hydraulic fluid lines completely. More fluid poured out, and the fire exploded in intensity. The flames spread to the rubber flooring, the plastic wall panels, the wooden desk, everything combustible in the conductor's rear cabin. And here's the cruel irony: when the hydraulic lines melted and lost pressure, the braking system engaged automatically. The brakes on these trains are kept open by hydraulic pressure. Loss of pressure applies the brakes. It's a fail-safe system designed to prevent runaway trains. In normal circumstances, it's a critical safety feature. But in this situation, with fire already burning in the rear cabin, that safety system had just locked 161 people inside a death trap. The train couldn't move. And because hydraulic pressure was gone, the doors couldn't open either. Back in the rear compartments, passengers are beginning to escape through the broken window that Erwin Gates created. One by one, they squeeze through the narrow opening, cutting themselves on the remaining shards of acrylic, and drop down onto the tunnel floor. 12 people from the rearmost compartment manage to escape this way. They gather on the tunnel track, coughing, disoriented, trying to figure out what to do next. One of these 12 is Thorsten Gradler, a volunteer firefighter from Germany. Gradler has enough training and experience to understand something that the other passengers don't. They are standing in what will soon become a chimney. The tunnel slopes upward at 30 degrees. Hot air rises, the fire is at the rear of the train, and they're currently below it. If they go upward, they'll be walking directly into the smoke and heat. Every instinct tells people to move away from a fire by going up and away from danger, but in a sloped tunnel, up is the wrong direction. Gradler shouts at the other escapees, "I know fireplaces, and when you open the flue, the fire shoots upwards. We have to go down, hold each other's hands, believe me, we have to go down." Some of the passengers look at him like he's crazy. The fire is behind them at the lower end of the train. Going down means going past the fire. It seems suicidal. But Gradler is insistent, and his confidence convinces them. The group of 12 joins hands and begins walking downward, past the burning rear cabin of the train. They move carefully, staying as far from the flames as possible. The heat is intense, but it's survivable for the few seconds it takes to pass the burning section. Once they're below the fire, the air is clearer, still smoky, but breathable. They keep walking down the tunnel track, moving slowly because they're wearing heavy ski boots, toward the lower entrance 600 meters away. As they walk through the darkness, they can hear the screaming and chaos from the train behind them. They know that 149 people are still trapped in there. But there's nothing they can do. Their only option is to save themselves and hope that help arrives quickly for everyone else. While those 12 are walking to safety, the conductor is still desperately trying to open the doors from his cabin at the front of the train. The hydraulic controls don't work. The power is gone, communication is cut off. He has no way to call for help, and no way to release the passengers. Finally, he makes a critical decision. He leaves his cabin and moves through the train, trying to reach the manual release mechanisms for the doors. It takes precious minutes during which more passengers are losing consciousness from smoke inhalation, but finally, the conductor manages to manually unlock the doors. Once unlocked, passengers can force them open. The doors slide apart, and people begin pouring out of the train into the tunnel. For a moment there's relief, they're out of the burning train, they can breathe slightly better air. They're going to survive. But then comes the fatal mistake, the decision that will determine who lives and who dies. In the pitch-black tunnel, disoriented and terrified, the passengers make the instinctive choice. They go uphill, away from the fire. It makes sense. The fire is behind them at the rear of the train. Going up means moving away from danger toward the Alpencenter station at the summit. Some passengers can even see light in that direction, the distant glow from the Alpencenter 2,500 meters up the tunnel. The smoke cloud racing up the tunnel accelerates. It's thick, black, and filled with carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide from burning plastics and synthetic materials. Carbon monoxide prevents oxygen from reaching the brain and organs, causing unconsciousness and death within minutes. Hydrogen cyanide is even faster, causing cellular suffocation almost immediately. The passengers fleeing uphill are walking into a death cloud. They can't see it. They can't outrun it. They're moving slowly in ski boots, stumbling in the darkness, breathing heavily from exertion and fear, and with every breath, they're pulling toxic gas into their lungs. Most of them don't make it more than 15 meters, 50 feet from the train before collapsing. Some make it further, driven by adrenaline and desperation, but eventually, everyone going uphill falls. They die from suffocation, from carbon monoxide poisoning, from the superheated air burning their lungs. Their bodies will later be found in the tunnel, scattered along the track, some still holding ski poles or reaching toward emergency shelter doors they could no longer see in the smoke-filled darkness. 149 people who escaped the burning train die in that tunnel because they went the wrong direction. The only 12 who survive are the ones who went downhill, past the fire, following Thorsten Gradler's counterintuitive advice that saved their lives. But the death toll isn't finished. At 9:40 a.m., approximately 30 minutes after the fire started, smoke reaches the Alpencenter at the summit. The station, located 2,500 meters, 8,200 feet, above the fire, begins filling with thick black smoke. The workers and customers inside the shopping mall and restaurant areas suddenly find themselves in danger. Staff members rush to evacuate everyone, shouting warnings and directing people toward exits. In the chaos of evacuation, employees leave the emergency exit doors wide open. This seems like the right thing to do. Leave the doors open so people can escape easily. But those open doors massively increase the chimney effect in the tunnel below. Fresh air rushes in through the open doors, flows down into the tunnel, feeds the fire with oxygen, and draws even more smoke upward into the Alpincentre. Most people manage to evacuate the Alpincentre successfully. But 4 staff members are overcome by smoke inhalation before they can escape. They collapse inside the station, unconscious. When firefighters arrive by helicopter and rush into the smoke-filled building, they find the 4 victims and carry them out. 3 are already dead. The 4th is revived but will suffer permanent injuries. The official death toll is now 155 people. 59 died in their seats on the train, overcome by smoke before the conductor could open the doors. 90 died fleeing uphill through the tunnel after escaping the train. 3 died at the Alpincentre from smoke inhalation, and later, at 1:16 p.m., the conductor who had tried so desperately to save his passengers dies in the hospital from his injuries and smoke inhalation. He had stayed in the smoke-filled train trying to open doors and help people escape, and that exposure had been fatal. Additionally, the second funicular train, the one that had been descending from the Alpincentre when the fire started, was trapped in the tunnel above the fire. That train contained just 2 people, a conductor and 1 passenger. Both died from smoke inhalation, unable to escape as the toxic cloud rose past their position. 155 people went into that tunnel on the morning of November 11, 2000. Only 12 came out alive, and the 12 who survived did so only because a volunteer firefighter among them understood something about fire behavior that saved their lives, while 143 others made the fatal mistake of going uphill toward what they thought was safety. The fire burned for 3 days. 3 full days during which the tunnel became an inferno that firefighters couldn't enter, couldn't fight, couldn't control. All they could do was wait outside and watch smoke pour from both entrances while temperatures inside climbed to levels that would melt steel and reduce human bodies to ash. The first firefighters arrived within 30 minutes of the alarm being raised. Austrian emergency services responded quickly and professionally. Helicopters transported teams to the Alpincentre at the summit. Ground units approached from the valley station at the base. But when they tried to enter the tunnel, they encountered conditions that made rescue impossible. From the valley side, firefighters found the tunnel completely smoke-filled. Visibility was 0, the air was toxic. They couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't advance more than a few hundred meters before being forced back. From the summit side, conditions were slightly better at first, but as they moved down into the tunnel, they hit the same wall of heat and smoke. The tunnel had become a horizontal chimney with the fire raging somewhere in the middle, and there was no way to reach it. Multiple rescue attempts were made throughout that first day. Firefighters tried repeatedly to push deeper into the tunnel, hoping to reach survivors, hoping to find someone still alive in one of the emergency shelters built into the tunnel walls. But every attempt was driven back by the impossible conditions. The heat was so intense that firefighters' equipment began to fail. Breathing apparatus couldn't filter the toxic smoke effectively. Protective clothing offered no defense against the radiant heat. And the darkness was absolute. The tunnel's electrical systems had been destroyed, leaving rescuers in pitch-black smoke where they couldn't see their own hands in front of their faces. The tunnel itself would never reopen. The Gletscherbahn Kaprun too was finished. In 2001, just months after the disaster, it was replaced by a gondola lift system, the Gletscherbahn, a 24-person funitel that traveled on the outside of the mountain rather than through it. The tunnel entrance was eventually sealed shut in 2011. The track and supporting structures below the tunnel were removed. The valley station was demolished. Every physical remnant of the funicular system that had killed 155 people was erased except for the sealed tunnel itself, left as a tomb and a reminder. But while the physical evidence was being removed, the legal investigation was just beginning. And what it would uncover was almost as shocking as the disaster itself. Just 4 days after the fire, an examining judge from Salzburg court appointed Anton Murr, a respected expert in fire investigations, to determine the cause. The Austrian Ministry of Interior also sent a forensic team from the KTZ Center to investigate. But from the very beginning, there were problems. When Murr arrived at the tunnel, he was denied access to the scene. The KTZ team had already gone in and removed critical evidence without proper documentation. By the time Murr was finally allowed to examine the wreckage, key pieces of evidence had been moved, altered, or taken away. He didn't receive the fan heater, the suspected ignition source, until March 2001, 4 months after the disaster. And when he did receive it, he immediately noticed something that would become central to the entire controversy. There were traces of red hydraulic fluid inside the heater housing. Murr's investigation led him to a conclusion that contradicted the official narrative being developed by other investigators. He found that the hydraulic system had been leaking flammable fluid onto the heater, that the heater had been improperly installed in violation of its own safety guidelines, and that the proximity of hydraulic lines to a domestic heater was a disaster waiting to happen. He documented all of this in a 54-page report that he submitted to the court. The Salzburg court ignored it completely. Meanwhile, the KTZ forensic team was developing a different theory. They claimed that the heater's heating element had come loose, touched the plastic rear wall of the heater housing, and started the fire that way. Their theory conveniently placed blame on the heater manufacturer, the German company Funicular, rather than on the Austrian companies and officials responsible for the funicular's modernization and operation. If Funicular was at fault, then Austrian parties could avoid liability. On June 18, 2002, 18 months after the disaster, the trial began. 16 people and companies were charged with manslaughter, 3 managers from Gletscherbahn and Capron AG, the company that operated the funicular, 2 managing directors from Swoboda Karosserie and Stahlbau GmbH, the Austrian company that had carried out the 1993 modernization and installed the fan heaters, 3 employees from the German company Mannesmann Rexroth AG, who had installed the hydraulic lines, 3 officials from the Austrian Ministry of Transport who had issued the operating licenses, 2 inspectors from the TÜV Technical Inspection Association who had approved the train, and 2 technicians and a builder who had installed the emergency door at the Gelaupen Center. The prosecution, led by Eva Daninger-Soriot, argued that the accused had made a series of catastrophic oversights. The fan heater was a Funicular Hobby TLB, a domestic appliance explicitly labeled "not for use in vehicles" in its instruction manual. Installing it in a moving funicular train was negligent. Positioning it directly beneath pressurized hydraulic lines was reckless. And approving the train for operation without proper safety inspections was criminal. But the defense had powerful support. Austrian authorities, it seemed, wanted to protect the country's reputation for safe cable railways. Tourism was a major part of Austria's economy, and cable cars, funiculars, and gondolas were essential infrastructure for the ski industry. Admitting that Austrian companies and regulators had allowed a death trap to operate for 7 years would damage that reputation and potentially open the door to liability claims worth millions. During the trial, defense attorneys were allowed to attack Anton Murr personally and professionally. They questioned his expertise, his methodology, his conclusions. The attacks were relentless and, according to news reports, affected Murr's mental health severely. At one point, the court discovered that Murr had sought psychiatric help and ordered him to undergo a psychiatric examination. When he was diagnosed with pronounced depressive syndrome, quite possibly caused by the stress of being attacked in court while trying to tell the truth about what had killed 155 people, the court dismissed him as an expert witness. With Mosher eliminated, the remaining experts, many with connections to the Austrian companies and regulators being investigated, presented a sanitized version of events that minimized culpability. On February 19, 2004, Judge Manfred Seiss delivered a verdict that shocked the nation. All 16 defendants were acquitted. Every single one. According to the judge, the heater had proper safety markings and was installed following legal standards of the time. The hydraulic system hadn't leaked. The train had been inspected properly. There were no indications or concerns that funicular railways could be dangerous in terms of fire protection. And then Judge Seiss said something that would haunt the families of victims for years. God turned off the light in the tunnel for a few minutes. According to the court, the disaster was an act of God, something that couldn't have been foreseen because nothing similar had ever happened before. Nobody was to blame. Case closed. 155 people were dead, and the Austrian justice system had declared it was nobody's fault. The families of victims were devastated. They had attended trial sessions for nearly 2 years, hoping for accountability, for justice, for someone to acknowledge that their loved ones had died because of negligence. Instead, they were told it was an act of God, an unavoidable tragedy. Many families openly wept in the courtroom. Others expressed rage. All felt betrayed by a system that seemed more interested in protecting institutions than delivering justice. But then the defendants made a mistake that would unravel everything. Emboldened by their acquittal, the management of Gletscher-Bahnen Kaprun AG filed a civil lawsuit against Fakir, the German company that manufactured the fan heater. They wanted to recover damages and shift financial liability onto the manufacturer. But what they didn't anticipate was that German authorities would take this case very seriously. In November 2005, the Heilbronn Public Prosecutor's Office in Germany took over the case and assigned it to the KTI Forensic Institute of the State Criminal Investigation Office in Stuttgart. The German investigators were determined to conduct a thorough, unbiased investigation. And what they found was explosive. First, they requested the fan heater from the undamaged twin train for examination. When they received it, they immediately noticed something shocking. The fastening dome of the heating element that had allegedly come loose and caused the fire was missing entirely. The Austrian KTZ investigators had claimed this component failed, but it wasn't even present in the heater they had examined. Had it been lost, removed, or had it never been loose in the first place? Next, the German team discovered that during installation in 1993, the heater had been disassembled. The front and rear housing had been taken apart, mounted into a hole cut in the control panel, and then fastened back together. This meant the heater's safety certification was no longer valid. It had been modified in a way that voided its safety rating. More importantly, disassembling the housing had compromised its protection against liquid ingress. The housing was supposed to be sealed to prevent any fluids from entering. Once disassembled and reassembled with gaps and improper seals, that protection was lost. Then came the discovery that would blow the entire Austrian investigation apart. Inside the heater housing, German investigators found red liquid residue. The Austrian court verdict had dismissed this as reddish condensation, nothing significant. But the German team sent samples to a laboratory for analysis. The result was unambiguous. The red liquid was hydraulic fluid. Highly flammable hydraulic fluid that had been banned in aircraft construction for decades because of fire risk. The hydraulic lines above the heater had been leaking, dripping flammable oil directly onto the heating element. When the oil reached ignition temperature, it burst into flames. The fire then melted the hydraulic lines completely, releasing 160 liters 42 gallons of flammable fluid that turned the conductor's cabin into an inferno. The German investigation also examined photographs taken by Austrian investigators immediately after the disaster. In those photos, the heating element was intact and at a safe distance from the plastic rear wall of the housing. But when the KTZ team presented the heater as evidence during the trial, the heating element had been bent toward the rear wall, touching it. Someone had deliberately manipulated the evidence to support the theory that the heating element had come loose and touched the plastic, starting the fire. In other words, the Austrian investigation had been rigged, evidence had been tampered with, critical findings had been suppressed. An expert witness who told the truth had been discredited and dismissed, and all of it had been done to protect Austrian companies and officials from liability. The German investigators issued a damning report. They concluded that the fire could hardly have happened the way Austrian investigators claimed. Instead, the fire had been caused by leaking hydraulic fluid, dripping onto an improperly installed domestic heater positioned where it should never have been. They further accused the Austrian KTZ forensic team of being sloppy in their investigation and of manipulating evidence. In 2008, German prosecutors filed criminal charges against 4 Austrian forensic experts for evidence tampering. Eva Danninger-Soriot, the prosecutor who had brought the original manslaughter charges in 2001, wanted to take the case, but Austria's Ministry of Justice declared her biased and blocked her involvement. The case was transferred to prosecutors in Linz, Austria, who conducted what observers described as a lukewarm investigation. After 4 months and consultation with the responsible ministry, the Linz prosecutors discontinued all 4 cases. No charges, no trial, no accountability. The Austrian state and Gletscher-Bahnen Kaprun AG had successfully buried the truth. They never officially recognized responsibility for the disaster. Instead, they offered insurance compensation totaling €13.9 million to settle civil claims from victims' families. 451 claimants accepted settlements. But 80 families refused, vowing to continue fighting for justice and full accountability. Those families are still fighting today. They want official recognition that the disaster was caused by negligence, that 155 people died because Austrian companies and regulators prioritized profit and reputation over safety, and that a corrupt investigation covered up the truth to protect those responsible. The technical findings are undeniable. The Fecchia Hobby TLB heater was never designed or certified for use in vehicles. Its instruction manual explicitly stated this. Installing it in a moving funicular train violated basic safety principles. Positioning it directly beneath pressurized hydraulic lines filled with flammable fluid was an obvious fire hazard. Any competent engineer reviewing the installation should have recognized the risk. But the 1993 modernization was approved by inspectors from the TÜV Technical Inspection Association, licensed by officials from the Ministry of Transport, and operated for 7 years without anyone raising concerns. How did this happen? The answer, tragically, is that it happens more often than people want to believe. Organizations cut corners to save money. Regulators become complacent and rubber stamp approvals without rigorous inspections. When disasters occur, powerful interests work to deflect blame and avoid liability. And victims' families are left fighting for justice against systems designed to protect institutions rather than people. The safety failures at Capron weren't limited to the heater. The entire train design was flawed from a fire safety perspective. Fire extinguishers were locked in the conductor's cabin, out of reach of passengers. There were no smoke detectors anywhere on the train. There was no intercom system, no way for passengers to communicate with the conductor. There were no emergency brakes that passengers could activate. The windows were made of shatter-resistant acrylic that required enormous force to break, good for security and weather protection, terrible for emergency escape. The doors were hydraulically operated with no manual override accessible to passengers. The tunnel itself lacked basic safety features. There was no fire suppression system. The emergency shelters spaced along the tunnel walls were inadequate, just small rooms that offered minimal protection. There was no secondary evacuation route, no parallel tunnel or ventilation shafts that people could use to escape if the main tunnel became impassable. The ventilation system had no fire mode. It couldn't be adjusted to control smoke flow during a fire. And critically, the 30-degree slope created a chimney effect that would inevitably turn any significant fire into an inferno. Compare this to modern tunnel safety standards developed after disasters like Capron and the Mont Blanc tunnel fire in 1999. Modern tunnels have comprehensive fire suppression systems, multiple evacuation routes, sophisticated ventilation that can control smoke movement, emergency communication systems, and designs that prevent chimney effects. Modern funiculars and cable cars have multiple emergency exits, manual door releases accessible to passengers, fire detection systems, and fireproof materials. None of these features were present in the Gletscherbahn Capron 2. The disaster forced changes across Austria and beyond. New regulations were implemented requiring extensive safety systems in all cable transport. Existing funiculars were evaluated, and many underwent expensive safety retrofits. The lessons from Capron, combined with lessons from the Mont Blanc fire, led to European Union-wide standards for tunnel and cable transport safety that are now among the strictest in the world. But for the victims' families, these changes came too late, and at too high a cost. 80 families, those who refused the settlement, continue to pursue justice. They attend memorials every November 11th. They give interviews to journalists. They push for the case to be reopened. They want the world to know that 155 people didn't die in an unavoidable accident or an act of God. They died because of negligence, cost-cutting, regulatory failure, and a corrupt investigation that covered up the truth. On November 11, 2004, the 4th anniversary of the disaster, a memorial was inaugurated at the site. It features a stone structure with 155 glass columns, each representing one of the victims. The columns are transparent, lit from within at night, standing as a beacon of remembrance. The names of all 155 victims are inscribed on bronze plaques. Families visit every year to lay flowers, to remember, and to ensure that their loved ones are not forgotten. Among the names are children who died with their parents, athletes whose careers were cut short, tourists who came to Austria for a vacation and never returned home. Every name represents not just a death, but a family destroyed, a future erased, a loss that can never be made whole. The 12 survivors, the ones who went downhill past the fire, live with the trauma of that day. Most have spoken publicly about their experiences, about the horror of escaping while knowing that 149 others were dying, about the guilt of survival, about the nightmares that still wake them decades later. Thorsten Gradler, the volunteer firefighter whose knowledge saved 12 lives, has been recognized as a hero, but he describes himself simply as someone who understood fire behavior and happened to be in the right place with the right knowledge at the right time. The Gletscherbahn Capron 2 disaster stands as one of the worst cable transport accidents in history. 155 people died in a tunnel fire that should never have started, and that might have been survivable if proper safety systems had been in place. A domestic space heater, installed where it never should have been, positioned beneath hydraulic lines filled with flammable fluid, ignited and set off a cascade of failures that killed everyone who went the wrong direction trying to escape. The tragedy was compounded by a justice system that failed to hold anyone accountable, by investigators who manipulated evidence, by officials who prioritized protecting institutions over delivering justice, and by a society that allowed powerful interests to bury the truth. 155 people died, and the Austrian state declared it was nobody's fault. But the families know the truth. The 12 survivors know the truth. And now you know the truth. The Capron disaster wasn't an act of God. It was an act of negligence, of cost-cutting, of regulatory failure, and of corruption. 155 people boarded a train on a beautiful November morning, expecting a day of skiing. They never came home, and the people responsible for their deaths walked away without punishment. That's the real tragedy of Capron. Not just that 155 people died, but that nobody was ever held accountable.